If you know so much, then translate this. CEO ignored Black Waitress and was left speechless. Jasmine Williams balanced the tray of plates perfectly as she navigated between the tables of the most elegant restaurant in New York City. It was a typical Thursday when her life would change forever because of an arrogant man who had no idea who he was dealing with. That's when CEO Richard Thompson deliberately raised his voice, speaking in French with his British partner about confidential business matters. He had noticed the Black Waitress passing near their table several times and decided to test her in a cruel way. "Waitress, come here," Richard shouted, making sure to use an authoritative tone that made the entire room look in their direction. Jasmine approached with professionalism, even as she felt the weight of the curious stares from other customers. She had worked in upscale restaurants for 2 years and knew how to handle difficult clients. But something about this man's demeanor put her on alert. "Yes, sir. How may I help you?" she asked with a polite smile. Richard smirked at his partner before replying in deliberately loud French so other customers could hear. "Je voudrais commander le plat du jour, mais je ne pense pas que vous compreniez ce que je dis." The British partner seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but Richard continued his display of arrogance. Jasmine remained silent, processing not just the words in French, but also assessing the intention behind them. "I said I'd like to order the dish of the day, but I doubt you understand what I'm saying," Richard repeated in English, laughing loudly. Typical in this country, they hire unqualified people to serve international clients. The words hit Jasmine like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the racial prejudice that stung, but the way he was trying to humiliate her publicly. She took a deep breath, remembering her mother's advice about keeping her dignity even in the toughest situations. "I understand perfectly what you said," she replied calmly. "May I take your order now?" Richard raised his eyebrows, surprised she knew French, but instead of apologizing, he decided to escalate the humiliation. "Interesting. Then let's see if you really know that much," he said, pulling out his phone. "My partner here is German. If you're so smart, translate this. Können Sie mir bitte die Speisekarte bringen und erklären Sie uns die besten Weine dieses Restaurants?" The restaurant grew even quieter. Other waiters stopped serving to watch the awkward scene unfold. The manager, Karen, observed from a distance, concerned but hesitant to intervene since he was an important customer. Jasmine felt her heart race. It wasn't fear of not knowing the translation. It was outrage at being tested like a circus animal. She looked Richard straight in the eye and answered firmly. "You're asking me to bring the menu and explain the restaurant's best wines. I can do that right now if you'd like." Richard's expression completely changed. His arrogant smirk gave way to genuine surprise. He hadn't expected a simple waitress to know German. Some customers began whispering among themselves, clearly impressed. Well, well," Richard muttered, trying to keep his composure. "2 languages is impressive for someone in your position, but I bet you can't handle Mandarin." That's when Jasmine realized this had become a public spectacle. Other customers discreetly pulled out their phones to record the scene. She could have walked away, but something inside her refused to let this man win. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, Richard continued speaking in Mandarin, pronouncing the words with obvious difficulty. Jasmine listened attentively, noticing he was reading from an online translator on his phone. The pronunciation was completely wrong, but she understood what he was trying to say. "You're trying to ask if I have a college degree," translated Jasmine, correcting the pronunciation. "But the proper way would be ni yu daksue suelima." A murmur of admiration spread through the restaurant. Richard was visibly shaken. He had completely underestimated this woman and now found himself in an embarrassing situation in front of everyone. "How is this possible?" Richard asked, trying to regain some control. "Where did you learn so many languages?" "In college," Jasmine replied simply. "I have a master's in linguistics from Columbia University and speak 8 languages fluently." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Richard could feel hundreds of eyes judging his every move. His British partner was visibly uncomfortable, staring at his plate and avoiding eye contact. "Then why are you working as a waitress?" Richard pressed, attempting to regain the upper hand. "Because my mother has cancer, And the treatments are expensive, Jasmine answered without hesitation. I work here at night to supplement my income from my daytime job as a private tutor. The response was like a slap in Richard's face. He had assumed she was uneducated, only to discover she was a highly qualified woman making sacrifices for her family. Some customers began showing quiet support for the waitress, nodding or offering encouraging smiles. Karen, the manager, finally approached the table. She was a middle-aged woman who had always treated Jasmine with disdain, assuming she was just another unqualified waitress. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize for the embarrassment," Karen said, addressing only Richard. "I can arrange for another server to assist you." "That won't be necessary," Richard replied quickly, sensing the situation spiraling out of control. It was just a misunderstanding, but Jasmine wasn't willing to let it go. 2 years of daily small humiliations, condescending looks, and subtle remarks had piled up. This was the final straw. "Actually, Karen, it wasn't a misunderstanding," Jasmine said, keeping her tone respectful but firm. "Mr. Thompson deliberately tried to humiliate me because he assumed I was ignorant based on my appearance and job." Karen grew visibly nervous. Richard Thompson owned one of the largest tech companies in the country and was a frequent customer. She couldn't afford to lose him. "Jasmine, please get back to work," Karen snapped. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion." "You're right," Jasmine agreed, surprising everyone. "It's not the place to publicly humiliate people based on prejudice." Richard tried to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. He could see customers recording on their phones and knew this could blow up on social media. "Look, it was just a joke," Richard said, forcing a casual tone. "I didn't mean to offend anyone." "A joke?" Jasmine repeated, letting her indignation finally show. "You tested me in public, like I was some trained animal, assumed I was ignorant because I'm black and a waitress, and even had the audacity to film it to laugh about with your friends." The accusation about the recording made Richard instinctively check his phone. He had forgotten he'd been filming initially to show his partners how typical American workers behaved. Now that recording could ruin his reputation. "I wasn't filming anything," lied Richard, but his body language gave him away. "Then you won't mind if I check?" asked Jasmine calmly. The question caught Richard off guard. He hadn't expected her to be so direct and sharp in her responses. Every word she spoke seemed calculated to expose his lies. "Of course not," he replied hesitantly, "but that's an invasion of privacy." "Just like assuming someone is ignorant based on their skin color and profession," Jasmine shot back. An elderly customer at a nearby table began clapping slowly. Others joined in until the entire restaurant was applauding Jasmine. Richard turned red with shame and anger, but mostly humiliation. Karen realized the situation had spiraled out of control. She needed to protect the restaurant's reputation, but she also couldn't afford to lose a client as important as Richard. "Jasmine, you're fired," Karen declared abruptly. "We don't tolerate employees who embarrass our customers." The applause stopped immediately. Jasmine felt as if she'd been punched in the gut. She desperately needed that job. Her mother's medical bills were sky high, and she was already working 2 jobs just to keep up. "Wait a moment," came a firm woman's voice from a corner table. Everyone turned to see an elegant silver-haired woman slowly rising to her feet. She wore simple but high-quality clothes and had observed the entire scene in silence until now. "My name is Eleanor Parker," the woman announced, walking toward the center of the commotion. "I'm the majority shareholder of TechSphere, the company where Mr. Thompson serves as CEO." Richard's face instantly paled. Eleanor Parker was a legend in American business. She had built an empire from scratch and was known for her philosophy of ethics and human respect. "Ms. Parker," Richard stammered, scrambling to stand. "What a surprise to see you here. I had no idea that I was watching how you treat people," Eleanor interrupted with an icy tone. "Well, Richard, consider this an unscheduled performance review." The restaurant fell completely silent. Not even the clink of silverware could be heard. Eleanor stepped directly between Richard and Jasmine. "In 50 years of business, I've never witnessed such a clear display of poor character and leadership," she continued. You humiliated a qualified employee, lied about your actions, and then allowed her to be fired for defending her dignity. Richard tried to speak, but Eleanor raised her hand to silence him. Don't finish that sentence, Richard. Every word out of your mouth now will be used in the emergency board meeting I'm calling tomorrow morning. Jasmine watched in disbelief. In minutes, she had gone from being humiliated to being defended by one of the most powerful women in the country. Ma'am, Jasmine said respectfully to Eleanor, I appreciate your intervention, but I don't want Mr. Thompson to lose his job because of me. Eleanor smiled for the first time since standing up. My dear, men like him lose jobs because of their own actions, not the consequences they face, and you've just shown more class and maturity in one sentence than he has all night. Karen was frantic. She realized she'd made a terrible mistake firing Jasmine in front of such a powerful shareholder. She tried to backtrack quickly. Ms. Williams, of course it was all a misunderstanding, Karen said with a forced smile. You're not fired. It was just the heat of the moment. Actually, she is fired, Eleanor said firmly, because I'm offering her a much better position. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers tremendously. Now continuing, Jasmine looked confusedly at Eleanor. She couldn't process how her night had changed so drastically. Just a few hours earlier, she had been a waitress struggling to get by, and now one of the most respected executives in the country was offering her a job. What kind of position? Asked Jasmine cautiously. Director of International Relations at TechSphere, Eleanor replied without hesitation. Someone with your natural linguistic and diplomatic skills would be perfect to expand our business globally. Richard watched his career crumble in real time. He knew Eleanor didn't make empty offers, and if she was offering a directorship to Jasmine, she truly intended to fire him. Miss Parker, with all due respect, Richard desperately interrupted, I think you're being too impulsive. You don't know this woman's full qualifications. Unlike you, Richard, I listen before judging, Eleanor countered. In 15 minutes of observation, I saw she speaks at least 4 languages fluently, maintains professionalism under pressure, has relevant higher education, and demonstrates moral integrity. Qualifications you clearly lack. Jasmine was overwhelmed by the situation. Part of her wanted to accept the offer immediately, but her cautious nature made her hesitate. Miss Parker, I'm truly grateful for the offer, but I need to care for my mother, Jasmine explained. She's undergoing chemotherapy, and I can't commit to frequent international travel right now. Jasmine's response impressed Eleanor even more. Even in the face of a life-changing career opportunity, she prioritized family. She was exactly the kind of person Eleanor wanted in her company. How about we start slow, Eleanor suggested. Work from home 3 days a week, office 2 days, and travel only when necessary and convenient for you. Plus, our company has one of the best healthcare plans in the country, which will fully cover your mother's treatment. Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes. For 2 years, she had struggled alone to pay for her mother's treatment, working 2 jobs and giving up her own dreams. Suddenly, a stranger was offering her not just a career, but also the solution to her biggest problems. I accept, Jasmine said, her voice trembling. The entire restaurant erupted in applause again. Customers stood up, and some even approached to congratulate Jasmine. It was as if everyone was celebrating not just her new opportunity, but also justice being served. Richard remained seated, trying to process how his attempt to humiliate a waitress had backfired into the destruction of his own career. He glanced at his phone and saw he'd already received several messages from British partners concerned about videos circulating on social media. Can I speak with you privately? Richard asked Eleanor, making one last attempt to save his position. There's nothing private between us, Richard, Eleanor replied publicly. Transparency is one of our core values, something you should have learned in your years as CEO. Karen watched everything with growing panic. She realized she'd not only lost an excellent employee, but also earned the enmity of one of the most influential people in the country. She tried to approach Eleanor to apologize. Ms. Parker, if I'd known Jasmine had these qualifications. The problem isn't her having qualifications, Karen, Eleanor interrupted. The problem is you assuming she didn't based on prejudice. Competent people exist in every profession and social class. The lesson was being delivered publicly, and Karen knew her reputation in the hospitality industry was being destroyed. Upscale restaurants rely on recommendations from influential clients, and she had just earned the dislike of one of the most powerful. Jasmine was still processing the change in her life. In just a few hours, she would go from a desperate waitress to the director of a major company. But she also felt an enormous responsibility for what had happened to Richard. "Mrs. Parker," Jasmine said hesitantly, "perhaps Mr. Thompson can learn from this. Everyone deserves a second chance." Jasmine's generosity surprised even Eleanor. Even after being publicly humiliated, she still showed compassion for the man who had tried to destroy her dignity. "Jasmine, you have a heart bigger than necessary," Eleanor said affectionately, "but some lessons are only learned through real consequences." Richard realized this was his only chance to try to redeem himself. He slowly stood up and walked over to Jasmine. I apologize," Richard said, but the words came out forced and insincere. "I was stressed with personal problems and ended up taking it out on you." Jasmine studied him for a few seconds before responding. "Mr. Thompson, stress doesn't justify humiliating others. Personal problems don't give you the right to assume someone is inferior based on appearance or profession." "You're right," Richard admitted, seeming genuinely remorseful for the first time that evening. "I behaved like a prejudiced fool." Eleanor watched the exchange with interest. She wanted to see if Richard was capable of real change or just trying to save his career. "Richard," Eleanor said, "if you're truly sorry, prove it with actions, not just words." "How?" Richard asked, clinging to any possibility of redemption. "Sponsor a scholarship for underprivileged students to learn languages," Jasmine suggested, before Eleanor could respond. "Use your resources to create opportunities instead of denying them to others." The suggestion was perfect. It was a constructive way for Richard to channel his need for redemption while creating something positive from the negative situation. "I'll do that," Richard agreed immediately. "Could it be at the school where you teach?" Jasmine smiled for the first time all evening. "I teach English to foreigners at a non-profit downtown. They always need more resources to expand the program." Eleanor watched the conversation with growing approval. Jasmine was turning a conflict into an opportunity for growth for everyone involved. "Very well," Eleanor said. "Richard, you'll be suspended from your executive duties for 6 months. During that time, you'll work directly with Jasmine's non-profit as a volunteer, learning about the realities you clearly don't understand." The punishment was severe but constructive. Richard would lose the prestige and salary of a CEO, but he'd have a chance to learn and grow as a person. "After the 6 months?" Richard asked hesitantly. "We'll evaluate whether you've learned anything of value," Eleanor replied. "If so, there may still be a position for you at the company. If not, you'll need to seek other opportunities." Richard nodded, understanding this was the best offer he could expect under the circumstances. He had lost everything due to his arrogance, but at least he had a chance to rebuild. "What about me?" Karen asked nervously. Eleanor looked at her with barely disguised contempt. "You fired an excellent employee for defending her dignity while protecting a client who was clearly in the wrong. That tells me everything I need to know about your values and leadership." Karen realized her career at the restaurant had come to an end. Eleanor had enough influence to ensure she would never land another management position in upscale establishments. "Please, Mrs. Parker," begged Karen, "I have a family to support." "So did Jasmine," Eleanor replied coldly. "The difference is she kept her integrity under pressure, while you showed your principles are negotiable when convenient." Jasmine felt uncomfortable watching Karen plead. Even after being mistreated, she didn't like seeing someone suffer. "Maybe Karen can learn too," Jasmine suggested gently. "Jasmine, your kindness is admirable, but leadership requires character," Eleanor responded. Karen had the chance to do the right thing and chose to protect power over justice. The contrast between the two situations was clear. Richard had acted impulsively out of arrogance, but Karen had made a calculated decision based on self-interest, fully aware it was wrong. The restaurant gradually emptied as customers paid their bills and left after witnessing the drama. Many stopped to congratulate Jasmine and wish her well in her new position. A hesitant teenage girl approached the group. It was Megan, Richard's daughter, who had seen her father's entire humiliation. She was visibly embarrassed, but determined to speak. "I'm sorry about my dad," she said to Jasmine. "He doesn't represent our whole family." Richard looked at his daughter in surprise. He hadn't realized she was at the restaurant with friends. The shame of being publicly humiliated deepened, knowing his own daughter had witnessed it all. "Megan, what are you doing here?" Richard asked, confused. "I came to eat with my school friends," the teenager replied. "And now I'm mortified because everyone saw you being prejudiced toward this woman." Megan's brutal honesty was like a slap to Richard's face. He realized his actions didn't just affect his career, they shaped how his family saw him. "Mum always said you were arrogant," Megan continued, addressing her father. "Now I understand why she divorced you." The revelation took everyone by surprise. Richard had mentioned personal issues as an excuse, but hadn't revealed he was going through a divorce. "Megan, this isn't the time or place," Richard said, trying to regain control. "When is the time?" the teenager shot back. "You're never home, you never talk to me, and when you do show up in public, you do things like this. When are we supposed to talk about your problems?" Jasmine realized she was witnessing a deeply personal family conversation and tried to step away discreetly, but Eleanor held her arm. "Stay," Eleanor murmured. "Sometimes people need to see the full consequences of their actions." Megan turned to Jasmine with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry again. I know it's not my responsibility, but someone in our family should have some decency." "Thank you," Jasmine replied kindly. "But you aren't responsible for your father's actions, and from what I see, you have far more character than you realize." The conversation between father and daughter continued, exposing years of pent-up resentment. Megan accused Richard of valuing work over family, treating employees as inferior, and using arrogance to mask his insecurities. "You think because you have money, you can treat people badly," the teenager said. "But look where it's gotten you. Mum left you, I'm ashamed of you, and now you've lost your job because of your awful character." Every word was like a dagger to Richard's heart. He was losing not just his career, but also the connection with the daughter he loved more than anything. "Megan, I can change," Richard promised desperately. "This episode made me realize a lot of things." "You always say you can change," his daughter replied, "but you never change anything. You just become more arrogant and distant." Eleanor observed the family dynamic with professional interest. As an experienced executive, she knew personal problems often manifested in professional behavior. What she had witnessed with Jasmine was likely a pattern of Richard's behavior, not an isolated incident. "Richard," Eleanor intervened, "perhaps the volunteer work is more necessary than I imagined. You clearly need to learn about empathy and human connection." Megan looked curiously at Eleanor, recognizing her from the business magazines she saw around the house. "You're Eleanor Parker, right?" the teenager asked. "My dad always talks about you like you're a legend." "And now she's the one who'll decide if he keeps his job," Jasmine added, with a small smile. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. Richard had spent years admiring Eleanor from afar, and now she was deciding the future of his career based on how he treated others. "Can I ask you something?" Megan said to Jasmine. "How do you speak so many languages?" "I've always loved studying," Jasmine replied. "I started learning English in public school, then French online, and kept adding languages whenever I had the chance." "And you really have a master's degree?" the teenager asked with admiration. "I do," Jasmine confirmed. "I worked during the day and studied at night for my bachelor's. The master's was on a scholarship." Megan was impressed. She was old enough to understand that Jasmine had earned her qualifications through hard work and dedication, something very different from the privileges she herself had enjoyed. "Why didn't you use your degree to get a better job sooner?" the girl asked with genuine curiosity. "I tried," Jasmine admitted. "But when I found out my mum was sick, I needed immediate and flexible income. Waitressing let me work nights and tutor during the day." The explanation revealed more about Jasmine's character. She had sacrificed her personal ambitions to care for her family, showing a loyalty and sense of responsibility that impressed everyone. "Your mum must be so proud of you," Megan said sincerely. "She always taught me that education is the one thing no one can take away," Jasmine replied warmly, "and that knowledge without humility is worthless." The words echoed through the nearly empty restaurant. It was a lesson Richard clearly needed to learn, and one even Megan, with all her privileges, could apply to her own life. Eleanor decided it was time to wrap things up. The evening had been enlightening for everyone involved, but also emotionally draining. "Jasmine, how about lunch tomorrow to discuss the details of your new position?" Eleanor suggested. "Of course," Jasmine agreed. "But first, I need to explain the situation to my mum. She'll be shocked by the change." "Bring her along," Eleanor said immediately. "I'd like to meet the woman who raised such an honorable daughter." The offer touched Jasmine deeply. For years, she had felt isolated, carrying the burden of supporting her family and caring for her sick mother alone. Suddenly, she had not just a better job but also a mentor who valued her family principles. Richard watched it all with a mix of envy and regret. He was seeing Jasmine receive the kind of recognition and respect he had always wanted, but had lost through his own behavior. "Mrs. Parker," said Richard hesitantly, "when can I start the volunteer work?" "Monday morning," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Jasmine will give you the NGO's address, and Richard is prepared to learn, not to teach." The instruction was clear. Richard wasn't being sent to do charity or feel superior. He was being sent to confront his own limitations and prejudices. "Understood," Richard agreed humbly. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Megan approached her father for the first time that night. "Dad, if you really change, maybe we can try to rebuild our relationship," the teenager said cautiously. "But it has to be real change, not just words." "I promise," Richard said, hugging his daughter. "Tonight made me realize so many things that were wrong in my life." Eleanor watched the reconciliation with interest. She knew real change takes time and effort, but at least Richard was showing a willingness to try. "Jasmine," Eleanor said, "one last question. Why were you so generous with Richard after everything he did?" Jasmine thought for a few seconds before answering. "My mum always said holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal hoping to hurt someone else. In the end, you're the one who gets burned. Besides, everyone deserves the chance to be a better person." Jasmine's simple yet profound wisdom impressed Eleanor even more. It was exactly the kind of perspective she wanted in her leadership team. "With that philosophy, you'll go far in business," Eleanor remarked approvingly. "I hope so," Jasmine replied. "But more than anything, I hope to keep being the person my mum taught me to be." The group finally began to part ways. Eleanor said goodbye to Jasmine with a warm hug, promising all the paperwork for the new position would be ready by lunch the next day. Richard and Megan left together, with his daughter agreeing to spend the weekend with him so they could talk more about the family issues they'd ignored for so long. Jasmine stayed behind in the nearly empty restaurant, still processing how her life had completely changed in just a few hours. She picked up her phone to call her mother and share the news. "Mom," Jasmine said when the call connected, "you won't believe what happened today." As she told her mother the story, Jasmine realized that night had been a turning point not just for her, but for everyone involved. Richard had been forced to face his prejudices, Eleanor had found a promising new director, and even Megan had learned valuable lessons about character and humility. Jasmine's mother cried with joy, hearing about the new job opportunity and the health insurance that would cover her treatment. It was as if all their prayers and sacrifices were finally being rewarded. "Sweetheart, I always knew your kindness and intelligence would be recognized one day," her mother said, her voice emotional. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." "We deserve it, Mom," Jasmine corrected. "We went through this together and we'll celebrate together too." The following weeks brought dramatic changes for everyone involved. Jasmine began her new position at TechSphere and quickly proved her worth, securing 2 major international contracts in her first month. Richard started his volunteer work at the NGO with initial resistance, but gradually began to understand the realities he'd ignored for so long. He met dedicated students who worked during the day and studied at night, immigrants struggling to learn English to secure better jobs, and families making enormous sacrifices for their children's education. The work forced Richard to confront his own privileges and prejudices directly and constantly. He discovered that many of the unskilled workers he had looked down on over the years had unbelievable life stories and determination he had never possessed. Megan began visiting her father at the non-profit, helping with translations and children's activities. For the first time in years, they had something in common to talk about, and their relationship slowly began to rebuild. Eleanor kept in regular contact with Jasmine, serving as a mentor not just professionally but personally. She was impressed by how quickly Jasmine adapted to the corporate world without losing her authenticity and values. "You have a natural talent for business," Eleanor said during one of their weekly lunches. "But more importantly, you have integrity. That's a rare combination." "I learn by watching people like you," Jasmine replied. "Success without character isn't really success." Jasmine's mother responded well to the new treatment covered by the company's health plan. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, and she grew stronger each week. "Seeing you happy at work is healing me more than any medicine," her mother often said. 3 months after that fateful night at the restaurant, Richard had undergone a genuine transformation. Volunteering had changed his perspective on nearly everything in his life. He learned to listen before judging, to value people for their character rather than social status, and to find fulfillment in helping others instead of just accumulating wealth. "How are you feeling about the work?" Eleanor asked during a scheduled review. "At first I was only doing it to get my job back," Richard admitted honestly. "But now I realize this was what was missing in my life. Real purpose." Eleanor studied Richard carefully. She had seen many people try to change for convenience, but few achieved genuine transformations. Richard seemed different, humbler, more attentive, more connected to others. "What do you want to do moving forward?" Eleanor asked. "I want to keep volunteering even if I return to the company," Richard answered without hesitation. "And I want to expand the scholarship program. I've seen how many talented people just need one opportunity." His answer convinced Eleanor the change was real. Richard was no longer focused solely on reclaiming his position, but on how he could use his resources to make a difference. "There's an opening overseeing social responsibility programs," Eleanor offered. "It would be a fitting start to your new career." Richard accepted the offer gratefully, understanding it was a second chance not everyone received. His new role involved coordinating education and job training initiatives for underserved communities. Jasmine continued rising in her position, eventually being promoted to Vice President of International Relations. She used her platform to implement cultural and educational exchange programs that benefited hundreds of young people. The story spread across social media and business news as an example of how confronting biases could lead to positive change for everyone involved. Jasmine became a sought-after speaker on diversity and inclusion in the corporate world. "The lesson I learned is that everyone has a story," Jasmine often said in her talks. "When we assume we know someone based on appearance or profession, we miss the opportunity to learn and grow." Richard also became an active advocate for diversity, using his personal experience to educate other executives about the costs of prejudice. He spoke openly about how his arrogance nearly destroyed his career and family. "I used to think success meant being above others," Richard admitted in his own talks. "I discovered that true success is lifting others up with you." A year after the night at the restaurant, the NGO where Richard volunteered had tripled in size thanks to the investments and partnerships he helped secure. Hundreds of people were learning new languages and professional skills. Megan, inspired by her father's and Jasmine's work, decided to study international relations and become a human rights advocate. She credited that night as the moment that defined her values and aspirations. "I used to think privilege was something to be enjoyed," the young woman reflected. "Now I understand it's a responsibility to help others." Jasmine's mother made a full recovery from cancer and became an active volunteer at the NGO, teaching English to immigrants. She often said her illness had been a blessing in disguise because it led to her daughter's transformation. "Sometimes God gives us challenges to prepare us for greater blessings," the woman mused. Jasmine was always special. She just needed the right opportunity to shine. Eleanor became a mentor not only to Jasmine, but to dozens of other young professionals from diverse backgrounds. She created a formal mentorship program at TechSphere focused on identifying and developing talent in non-traditional places. "Talent exists everywhere," Eleanor said in interviews. "Our responsibility as leaders is to recognize and nurture it, no matter where we find it." 2 years later, Jasmine and Richard often worked together on social responsibility projects. They had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. "You taught me it's possible to keep integrity, even in the toughest situations," Richard told Jasmine during a corporate diversity conference. "And you taught me that people can truly change when they're willing to do the necessary work," Jasmine replied. "Both are valuable lessons." The restaurant where it all began changed management after Karen was fired. The new leadership implemented strict anti-discrimination policies and created a more respectful environment for employees and customers. A sign at the entrance read, "We respect the dignity of all people," a direct change inspired by the events of that fateful night. Jasmine's story became a case study in business schools as an example of how to respond to adversity with dignity and turn negative situations into opportunities for growth. Students from across the country wrote to Jasmine asking for advice on handling discrimination and pursuing dreams despite obstacles. She personally responded to every letter, remembering how words of encouragement had been important in her own journey. "Never underestimate the power of a determined person with strong values," Jasmine often wrote. "You can change not only your own life, but also positively influence everyone around you." Richard established a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships and professional training for young people from underprivileged communities. In its first 2 years, the foundation had already benefited over 1,000 people. "Every person we help reminds me of how much talent we waste when we judge based on appearances," Richard reflected during foundation events. Megan Thompson graduated high school as the class valedictorian, using her speech to talk about social justice and the importance of confronting prejudice. She was accepted into several prestigious universities and chose to study at Columbia University to stay close to the social work that inspired her. "My father taught me, without meaning to, that our actions define who we are more than our words," Megan said in her graduation speech, "and that it's never too late to choose to be a better person." Eleanor Parker expanded TechSphere's diversity programs across Latin America, creating opportunities for thousands of talented professionals who had previously been overlooked by traditional corporate markets. "Diversity isn't just the morally right thing to do," Eleanor explained at international conferences. "It's also the smartest business strategy. Diverse teams are more creative, more innovative, and more successful." Jasmine's mother became a beloved figure at the NGO, known for her wisdom and the advice she gave to discouraged students. She often shared her own story of resilience to inspire others. "I faced many hardships in life," she told the students, "but every obstacle taught me something valuable. The point isn't to avoid problems, but to learn from them and use those lessons to help others." 3 years after that fateful night, Jasmine was invited to be the keynote speaker at an international conference on ethical leadership. In her speech, she shared the full story of how an attempt at humiliation turned into an opportunity for growth for everyone involved. "That night taught me that our response to adversity defines us more than the adversity itself," Jasmine told an audience of 1,000 business leaders. "When we choose dignity over anger, education over retaliation, we can turn destructive moments into catalysts for positive change." Richard watched the speech from the audience, applauding with tears in his eyes. He had become one of Jasmine's strongest advocates and often shared his own story of transformation as proof that real change is possible. "Jasmine could have destroyed me that night," Richard said in later interviews. "Instead, she chose to educate me. That choice didn't just change my life, it changed the lives of hundreds of people who benefited from the programs we built together. The NGO where it all began became a national model for inclusive education. Delegations from other countries regularly visited to learn about its methods and programs. What started as a small community center had grown into an internationally respected institution." I never imagined that teaching English to immigrants would turn into a national movement, the NGO's director said. But when people like Jasmine and Richard dedicate themselves to a cause, miracles happen. Megan began her university studies with a scholarship from her father's own foundation, insisting she wanted to be treated like any other program beneficiary. She worked part-time at the NGO while studying, following Jasmine's example of balancing education with social responsibility. "Privilege without purpose is wasted," Megan told her college classmates. "I have opportunities others don't, so it's my responsibility to use them to create more opportunities for others." Eleanor retired from her executive role at 70, but remained active as a consultant and mentor. She dedicated her final professional years to identifying and developing ethical leaders like Jasmine across Latin America. "My greatest professional pride isn't the companies I built," Eleanor would reflect in interviews. "It's the people I helped discover and develop their potential. Investing in people is always the best investment." The story inspired dozens of books, documentaries, and even a film that highlighted how small acts of courage and dignity can create waves of positive change. Jasmine used the royalties to further expand the educational programs. "I never thought my experience as a waitress would become a movie," Jasmine laughed in interviews. "But if our story can inspire even one person to treat others with more respect, all the exposure was worth it." 5 years later, Richard had become one of the most respected philanthropists in the country. His foundation had grown to operate in 12 states, offering education and vocational training to over 10,000 people annually. "That night at the restaurant was the worst and best moment of my life," Richard reflected. "Worst, because it revealed how horrible I had become. Best, because it gave me the chance to become the person I should have always been." The relationship between Richard and Megan strengthened tremendously over the years. They worked together at the foundation during Megan's university breaks, creating positive memories that replaced years of distance. "My father taught me it's never too late to change," Megan said, "but also that real change requires constant work, not just good intentions." Jasmine married a colleague from TechSphere, a kind engineer who shared her values of social justice and education. They had 2 children and started a family foundation focused on language education for underprivileged children. "I want my kids to grow up understanding that knowledge is power, but power without compassion is dangerous," Jasmine said about her parenting philosophy. Jasmine's mother became a devoted grandmother and continued her volunteer work well into her 80s. She often told her grandchildren about the night that changed their family's fate, emphasizing the importance of keeping dignity even in the toughest situations. "Your mother could have reacted with anger," she told the grandchildren, "but she chose to educate rather than destroy. That choice changed our lives and so many others." 10 years after that fateful night, a special gathering was held at the same restaurant to celebrate a decade of positive change inspired by the events of that evening. Jasmine, Richard, Megan, Eleanor, and dozens of beneficiaries of the educational programs came together to reflect on the impact of their actions. "When I left this restaurant 10 years ago, I thought my life was over," Richard said during the celebration. "In truth, my real life was just beginning. And I left thinking I had only lost a job," Jasmine added. "I never imagined I was gaining an extended family and a life mission." Eleanor, now 75 but still sharp and energetic, served as the gathering's MC. "This story proves real transformation is possible when we face our prejudices and choose growth over self-defense," Eleanor said. "All of you have given me hope for humanity's future." Megan, now a graduate in international relations working for a global human rights NGO, spoke about how that night defined her career and values. "I was 16 and thought I knew everything," Megan recalled. "That night taught me true education comes from humility and a willingness to learn from others, especially those different from us." Jasmine's mother, now 72 and fully recovered from cancer, shared her perspective on the events. "As a mother, I worried the world would be too cruel for a daughter who always saw the best in people," she said emotionally. "That night proved to me that kindness and intelligence are the most powerful forces in the world." During the celebration, it was announced that a new language school would open jointly funded by Richard Thompson's Foundation and TechSphere. The school would be named the Eleanor Parker Education Center, in honor of the woman who turned a destructive situation into an opportunity for growth. "I never thought my name would be on a school," Eleanor said with tears in her eyes. "But if it inspires even one child to study and achieve their dreams, it will be my greatest honor." The school would open in the neighborhood where Jasmine Williams grew up, offering free language education to children and adults in the community. The project represented the full cycle of transformation, from humiliation to education, destruction to construction, prejudice to understanding. "This school is proof that no act of kindness is too small to make a difference," Jasmine said during the announcement. "Choosing to respond with dignity instead of anger created waves of change that are still spreading." Richard announced he would serve as the volunteer director of the new school, dedicating the rest of his career to community education. "At 52, I finally found my true calling," Richard said. "It's not about accumulating wealth, but sharing knowledge and opportunities." The celebration ended with everyone present signing a pledge to continue spreading the values of respect, education, and personal growth that defined their collective journey. "May our story inspire others to choose growth over retaliation," Jasmine said in closing. "And may everyone who hears it remember that we all have the power to turn difficult moments into opportunities to make a difference." The end. So, what did you think of this story of transformation? How would you have reacted if you were in Jasmine's place? Share your thoughts in the comments about the choices each character made and whether you believe people can truly change, like Richard did. Your input means so much to us.